Well, today we're going to take a look at some of the top local news for the past week, including a charter school expansion and the downtown development cap. Elena, let's start with Ravenswood. There's some upheaval there. A charter school wants to expand. The district is obligated to provide its space. Tell us what's happening.
Sure. So the school board met last night after sort of they had a series of meetings for the last week to talk about this issue with KIPP, which is one of two charter schools in Ravenswood, wanting to expand and needing additional space to accommodate its enrollment. And the board voted last night to make a preliminary offer to KIPP, which is not set in stone. It's not the final offer, but they're preliminarily offering to share space at the Ravenswood Middle School. So all of KIPP's middle schoolers, which makes up about half of its enrollment, will, under this proposal, would go to the RMS campus starting this fall and share that space with the district middle schoolers there.
I hadn't realized that they had so many middle schoolers. I understand there's more than 200 students total, and that's TK, K, and 1, and
at
6. Yeah, at KIPP.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of students. Now, Ravenswood Middle School's in its infancy.
Yeah, so some teachers spoke out about that last night, just concerned that this is putting a burden on them at a really difficult time. They're still they're building up, they're trying to sort of get their bearings at the school. They lost their principal and vice principal after their first year. The leadership team at Ravenswood Middle School signed a letter saying that there was a plan for the school and not everything is put in place yet, so it just feels like it's a lot of upheaval at a difficult time for the district's brand new school.
What has the relationship been like between the Ravenswood district and KIPP school? Because I understand they have some obligations to provide for KIPP under Prop 39, but has it been pretty copacetic, and how has the expansion plan influenced this relationship?
I mean, I remember I was at the meeting when the board approved KIPP's charter a few years ago, and it was contentious. I mean, they rallied parents in the community around getting, what they described as a better alternative educational option. So a bunch of parents signed a petition, and a full boardroom of parents really wanting this other option for their kids. Parents who are unsatisfied with the district and the quality of education there, and then the people who are very loyal to public schools and to supporting the district, and sort of saying, the more, it's great to give families alternatives, but the more of these options that pop up, which we've seen happen in East Palo Alto, the fewer students end up going to Ravenswood, and they rely on the state funding. So their enrollment is shrinking along with their funding, and they're struggling to sort of figure out what that means for them long term.
So do they expect the KIPP expansion to further lead to even more decrease in public school students or district students?
KIPP anticipates growth, and Ravenswood anticipates declining enrollment. And it's not just KIPP; there are other charter schools, and there are students who go to the Palo Alto School District, for example, through the voluntary transfer program. But just an increasing number of students are choosing to go elsewhere.
Yeah, and this seems like an issue that's playing out across the country, where you have particularly sort of disadvantaged communities where maybe the parents are looking for more alternatives, that they are gravitating towards the private schools if there's scholarships, that charter schools are becoming increasingly popular. So Ravenswood isn't the only one by any means that's dealing with this shrinking enrollment and shrinking funding.
No, not at all. And I think the issue of charter schools' impact on public school districts is playing out across the state. Even the governor, Gavin Newsom, has asked to convene a panel of experts to study this. There's a lot of concern. That was one of the big issues underlying the teachers' strike in LA Unified. There are some school boards that are considering charter school moratoriums. So it's definitely, I think this will just only continue to play out.
Yeah. So if you look at the fine print of Prop 39, some of the requirements for facility space seem a bit challenging. So right now, the charter school's at 2 campuses, but they're contiguous.
Yes.
And contiguous seems to be a key word.
Yes.
That they want to provide adequate space that is not a burden to the charter schools, such that they're not over here and over there and over here. But this plan to have some kids at Brentwood, where they are currently, and then some kids at RMS, seems to go against the law.
Well, in order to make this a multi-site offer, districts have to explain why they can't house a charter school at a single campus. So the district is saying that in order to provide the space at Brentwood or McNair, where KIPP currently is, it would mean either eliminating entire grade levels or having to redraw district boundaries or even moving the Los Orbes McNair kids entirely to another place. So they're saying that would be inequitable and would unfairly impact the district. But there are these like very tight legal obligations that the district is under. So regardless of, and some board members have been very clear about sort of criticisms about charter schools and all of that, but they have legal obligations to provide equal facilities. These are still district students, and that's another sort of point that keeps coming up of there's this clear division, but these are still Ravenswood, East Palo Alto students. They're just choosing to go to a charter school. Yeah.
Let's talk about the board, because some of the board is brand new and they're facing this for the first time, and others have already voted on the charter school acceptance into the district. So the new ones first, what are their kind of takes on this? Tamara and Stephanie?
So yeah, Tamara and Sobomahine and Stephanie Fitch were the new board members and the new president and vice president. Tamara had some sort of, she indicated that she wanted to fight this at one of the community meetings last week and sort of find a way to push back, and indicated that, her priority is taking care of district students. Stephanie, it's been a little bit more unclear about what her position is. She said last night, just wanted to make clear this isn't the final offer or vote, so this isn't what we're going to do necessarily.
Their deadline was today for making that offer. So.
Yes, they were under a really tight deadline, and it had already been extended. And KIPP agreed to extend the deadline to allow the board to host these community meetings to gather input from the public. And then Anna Polito and Sharifa Wilson were on the board when they approved KIPP's charter in 2016. They both voted for it, but made it pretty clear that it was just because it was legally sound, so they had no footing to sort of oppose it, but they, in sort of philosophy, don't agree with the charters and worried about the impact it would have on Ravenswood, which is now happening.
And Maria Elena Guyana Mendoza, she's the fifth member.
She is, and she also, I think she's indicated a little bit more of like the let's figure out how to fight this, but it's not, last night there was not very much discussion of this, surprisingly, so it's sort of unclear where they all stand on this particular proposal. It seems a little bit like a placeholder, so they can now negotiate with KIPP and figure out what to do next.
Yeah, the fact that they had a proposal so well fleshed out, but hadn't discussed it in a public session, what can we make out of that?
It seems as if they might have discussed it in closed session. I don't know that for sure. But yeah, they came out with this fully fleshed out resolution, and then only 2 of the board members commented pretty briefly on it, so they seem to be aware of it.
Legally, is there a way to have a closed session under Prop 39 about facilities?
It's my understanding that boards can agendize anticipated litigation, even if there's not an actual case or threat even from a charter school, but that if it's even anticipated that if we made this offer and they could counter with some sort of legal action, that they can just discuss that in closed session. And there was an anticipated litigation item on the board's closed session agenda last night.
Okay, all right. The community, there were 6, I think, meetings, 5 or 6 meetings last week, that, some of which you attended. What was kind of the overall tenor of those meetings?
Well, because at first it seemed like the only option would be closing a site to make room for KIPP. There was a lot of outpouring of please don't displace us, obviously, and all our schools deserve to be where they are, and can't we figure something else out? So that was a lot of the original sort of pushback. And then the board, particularly Tamara, made it very clear we are not going to close a school. That's just not an option for us. And there's also sort of these other simmering issues that this has brought up, and that came up at some of the board meetings about this sort of the dynamic with charter schools, and then also sort of concerns about district leadership, in particular the superintendent, which she's had a lot of opposition in recent years, and this is sort of reviving that.
The upheaval continues. First it's fiscal, then it's managerial, and now we have this, it's kind of combining things. All right, so there is a firm deadline for Ravenswood and KIPP to either agree upon something or have some.
The district has to make a final offer by March 1st. So
March 1st or April 1st?
I thought it was March 1st.
Okay, well, it's coming up.
Yeah.
All right.
Very soon.
Well, thanks, Elena. So we're moving from space and how to share it to space downtown and how to allocate businesses. I don't know. That was not a good transition. Anyway, downtown cap.
Valiant effort. Well, I think it also is about sharing spaces, and that kind of became a theme during this whole discussion of downtown cap and the idea of mixed-use projects downtown area being the main vehicle to create residential developments, which was a very contentious idea. But the thing about the downtown cap, which, as you know, as we reported, the council repealed this week, it's kind of hard to separate the policy from the politics in this issue, because I feel like the politics have kind of influenced, in some ways even poisoned the policy discussion. When you think about how this became a big issue in January 2017, it was probably the most contentious meeting that I've covered in a few years. Where a 5-4 vote, it was kind of unexpected. It was a very political decision.
Yeah, and that had to do with them trying to decide whether or not it should be in the comp plan.
Yeah, and so that really kind of poisoned the well for a lot of residents who thought this was, they didn't expect this, and this was like a kind of the pro-development side voting to remove this pretty popular policy out of the comprehensive plan by a 5-4 vote. There was an opinion piece by somebody from the minority, Tom Du Bois, basically talking about hijacking of democracy. So anyway, this was in January 2017, and we're here like 2 years later, and now this is kind of time to actually remove the policy out of the zoning code. And there's a reasonable way to discuss like the policy and its implications, but I feel like when you hear like the public talk about it and the connotations behind the policy discussion, it all kind of goes back to 2017, and people have such strong opinions about where you stand on this issue because it connotes where you stand on everything pretty much.
Wow, yeah.
Like, which team are you on? It's very much us against them kind of thing. And in some ways it kind of brings out the worst of the city council in terms of divisiveness. I mean, they've been pretty united so far, the new council, on most things, but when it comes to commercial development, it seems like that's when the claws come out.
It seems like people get very hyperbolic when they talk about things like limiting office development and allowing residential, because it seems like an either all or nothing for some reason.
Yeah, you either freeze downtown or you wreak havoc. There's no middle ground depending on who's talking.
Yeah, which one do we favor?
And neither of them is true whatsoever, so we can get into that.
So there's some interesting arguments that were put forth. Let's talk about Judy Kleinberg, the city, CEO of the Chamber of Commerce.
Yeah, she's a former mayor.
Former mayor.
Yeah.
Yeah, what was her kind of thought on why the cap should be repealed?
A vote for office is a vote for housing.
All right.
Which is kind of a weird, funny
way
way
the
to
housing
look at it.
advocates go, huh?
But what she's saying is basically it takes a lot of money to produce housing, especially affordable housing, because it's much more lucrative for developers to build office spaces, which fetch a lot more in rent.
Yeah.
So in order to produce housing, you need to encourage mixed-use developments, which have a profitable office component that you could then subsidize housing with.
Okay.
And that's a theory that many people talk about. It hasn't really been, you haven't seen too much of that in Palo Alto. You see projects like 429 University and the Olive Garden, where you have just a handful of very high-priced housing units, or expected to be high-priced, just like five or six, and then like a few thousand feet of office space.
Okay.
So
it doesn't comp for the residential, doesn't comp for the number of employees who are
exactly, and it doesn't get you very far as far as trying to get to 300 units per year, which is the city's goal between now and 2030.
Okay.
The comp plan.
Yeah.
So if you talk about 5 units divided by 300, so you'd need 60 office developments.
Buildings.
Yeah, so the math is shaky.
Yeah.
But for other people, like that's just one of the reasons. I mean, Liz Niss who was a big proponent of repealing the cap, both in 2017 and this week. She made a whole slide presentation about the changes University Avenue faced going back to the 20s.
Wow.
Which I don't think persuaded anybody who opposes the cap. And her idea was the place keeps on changing. Yeah, so we can't freeze downtown. Yeah. Which again, I think is a mischaracterization of this proposal, but that was her position.
Yeah, I mean, this is really just an office cap, as opposed to any other type of business development.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually more than that. It's a non-residential development cap. So So it would limit many types of development, but staff presented an option which Eric Filseth and others supported, which would allow retail to get built. And so had that proposal carried, there would be no cap on retail, and obviously residential would still be encouraged because it's only non-residential. So so if you could have retail and residential continue, it's hard to see. It's hard to see how downtown development is frozen. It's just it's frozen towards offices and things of that nature and hotels.
Exactly.
So,
how was the cap talked about during the most recent city council election, and were there any sort of campaign promises related to it?
There were no promises. There were kind of insinuations. I mean, the biggest wild card was Allison Cormack, obviously, because everyone else has already taken a position on it, and it's well known where they stand. Allison basically said that she thinks downtown caps have served us well, and she saw no reason to eliminate it. But she wasn't like, I wouldn't say that was like a campaign promise. It was more of like, there were a lot of politics involved, and you need to look into it. But when we asked her specifically, like during our Coverly debate with people watching, how would you have voted on downtown cap? She made it seem like I saw no reason to remove it, I think were her words. So many people were very upset. I mean, they interpreted that as almost a pledge, which may be taking it too far. But we've seen quite a bit of backlash in the comments. And
what was her reason at the meeting for voting as she did then? I
think it was part of the we don't want to kind of freeze downtown kind of thing. I mean, she brought up the kinds of things like, would a performing arts center be allowed if this cap was in place, and that kind of stuff. Basically implying that it's too broad a kind of, you're casting too broad a net on non-residential development. There may be things we might like. There might be some philanthropists who propose some project that really benefits the community, and we don't want to jeopardize it with this kind of cap on non-residential development, which is very broad. And the retort would be, if something like this comes up, the council can always exempt it, or it can always change the cap. It always has discretion.
Palo Alto's been known to make exceptions.
Yeah, exactly. So.
Okay. And what role in the discussion did the President Hotel play? Because that, of course, is the big elephant in the room. Has been for a number of months. It was
it's subtext, but it wasn't really explicitly talked about much. We know that this is one of the several zoning barriers that the President Hotel application has. There's still the grandfather facility provision, the changing use provision, which basically says if you're historical use and you renovate, you can't change to different use. I mean, the council, I mean, it's been repealed, but you still can't change from residential to non-residential, or the Planning Commission recommended that anyway. So, and there's also parking issues, but the downtown cap was one of the barriers that AJ Capital, the new owner of President Hotel, was facing, and it's one of the zoning changes that AJ Capital has explicitly asked for the city to change when it was kind of proposing its term sheet, and when it was making its agreement with tenants to extend the leases, basically saying if the council repeals this downtown cap and another clause, we'll let them stay longer. So it's a big win for AG Capital, but it's not something that the council members talked about because it remains a pretty unpopular project, and nobody would say we're going to abolish this cap because we want to help President Hotel conversion.
Right. And just to be clear, the conversion, the square footage of that would exceed the
I mean, that's an important point because the cap is 350,000 square feet, and the city is already at like 320.
2030?
It's 321, I think, or something. Or 31. I think it's at 331,000 now. There's about 18,000 roughly square feet left. So you wouldn't be able to do a President Hotel, and wouldn't be able to do much of anything office-y other than some small office buildings. Under the existing.
All right, and let's just talk quickly about the split then, the 7 members who voted for what?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same split as last year, plus Allison joining the 3 people who supported the repeal, which is Vice Mayor Adrian Fine, Councilwoman Liz Niss, and Greg Tanaka, who didn't say a word, but was consistent with his prior vote. And on the other side, you have the same people, minus Karen Holman. You had Mayor Eric Filseth, and council members Tom Du Bois and Lydia Coop.
Okay.
And they weren't happy.
Yes. All right. So philosophical differences continue with the new council. Finally, I just wanted to talk about the news that really wasn't news. The biggest news for the state that really wasn't news to anyone around here. And what was that?
High-speed rail. Yeah, it's one of those things that there was very anxious times in 2009, 2010 in Palo Alto when he thought the high-speed rail was coming, and people were excited about it in 2008. Then when they learned about the Berlin Wall, the berm that was proposed with 4 tracks, everybody really kind of shifted against the project.
Yeah.
And then as people looked at the funding and the ridership projections, people got even more against it. We've seen lawsuits from Atherton and Menlo Park. Palo Alto joined some of them. So it was deeply unpopular. But since 2012, it's kind of like it faded a little bit from attention out here because all the focus shifted to Central Valley. And so people here were more focused on Caltrain. Central Valley was where all the action is.
Yeah.
And this
And the
week,
blended system was proposed for up here.
and
so
the blended
that took
system,
some of the heat off.
which means you'd use 2 tracks for both Caltrain and high-speed rail. So that makes
Same as what we have.
So people here were basically hearing, actions in Central Valley. We don't need to worry about it too much. And this kind of became official when Gavin Newsom made his State of the State speech and basically said, we're going to continue our focus on Central Valley, and we're not even thinking about LA to San Francisco anymore, which is the system that the voters approved in 2008.
Yeah.
So even under the best case scenario, that was kind of the reality. The federal funding wasn't there. There's been about $3.5 billion in federal funding for a $77 billion project or whatever it is now.
Yeah.
Private funding wasn't there, and all you had was some state bonds. So, so Gavin Newsom basically explained that it's not realistic to expect it now. And
So it's going to be reset to Bakersfield. And I understand that the EIR for the entire state line is still moving forward with some vague hope that maybe in some other phase, after this phase actually closes, that maybe some funding will come through or maybe some effort.
Right. I mean, there might be a different presidential administration in 2020, and there definitely will be one in 2024. And you never know how the federal priorities will change with the funding, and you never know how, state and locals, maybe they'll be able to pony up more. Maybe private funding will become available. You never know. So he is going through with the environmental analysis, and he's also continuing with his regional projects, which money for electrification. So
which is more important for here.
Yeah. So it's doing some good, but the San Francisco to LA bullet train, that's kind of what's off the table for now.
Yeah.
Not quite dead, but
yeah. It seemed like it was a necessary recognition of reality on his part because of the audit that came out in November indicating that there were like $600 million in change orders. Some change orders are expected in any project, but...
Yeah, there's been many critical audits, of which the November 2018 from the State Auditor's Office is just the latest. But this project, I mean, that's kind of been a rule rather than an exception with high-speed rail. Like every audit basically comes up with new findings about waste. I mean, you have like consultants overseeing consultants. It's like a quasi-public or association overseeing it all. It's not even Caltrans. There's all sorts of governance issues, and so it's just been really messy.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
no money, full political support. So, though I would say the idea that he's pulling the plug on the project is a little bit premature. It's not really an obituary for high-speed rail, but it's more, as you said, a recognition of facts on the ground.
Yeah, and he said that transparency is going to become like a high priority. That there's going to be data available on a website. It seems like that should already be out there, but yeah. Well, he's promising transparency over what will move forward from here on out.
Yeah, easy to promise transparency when there's no project to be transparent about, but I look forward to going online and seeing what the consultants are doing next.
Likewise. Okay, thanks for the wrap-up of this week. If you want to stay on top of Palo Alto news, go to paloaltoonline.com. And just so you know, we have a daily newsletter weekdays called Express that goes out every morning, capturing all the latest news. You can sign up for that at paloaltoonline.com/express. We will see you next week.